draft budget. On the next slide is a timeline. We have to adopt the preliminary budget by September 30th, so I just want to remind you of that. And then we'll be bringing together the water and sewer budget in September or October. And then we need to adopt the final levies and the final budget by December 28th. On this next slide, just want to recap the equation to get to the tax capacity rate. I had my info a little wrong last time. The fiscal disparity is 291, and the estimated contribution that is taken out to get to adjusted net tax capacity is updated on the left side. But the math was correct, so my equation was just my numbers were a bit off last time. So in this updated draft budget, we got a tax capacity rate of 43.32%. The first draft that we presented was at 44.752%. So we got it down by 1.432%. So on the next slide, these are some of the biggest changes from our first version of the draft budget. We got the tax rate down to 1.432%, like I stated. We decreased the budget from prior draft by $227,070. The biggest changes would include adding $10,000 into revenue line item for rental licenses.
Can I ask you what rental that you're referring to?
That would be the rental. We have discussed moving forward with the rental ordinance. We wanted to put some money in, anticipate some money into the budget if we were to move forward with home rental licensing.
Home rentals, okay.
So we did tried to be modest and conservative with our numbers that we had put in there. We were anticipating $325 per
rental license.
Per rental license,
Mhm.
and so we're
Yeah.
trying to be somewhat conservative on the total number of rentals within the
Yeah.
community.
We just don't know how many there are, so the numbers could be greater or less, but we just don't know at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a budget increase for rental licenses?
So we increased the revenue.
Oh,
So
really?
it would
The revenue
decrease, it would
side.
decrease the.
Levy.
Oh,
the Increase
man.
in the revenue meant a decrease in the overall.
Oh, okay.
or the-
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I know I voted for that rental stuff, but I'm starting to second guess myself. What are we afraid of if we don't have a rental ordinance?
So then that would just mean we wouldn't get any revenue for anyone renting.
But I'm just saying, I remember the conversation, I just want
We have
to,
not yet adopted the rental ordinance. We will be looking at that at the September 22nd.
yep, I'm aware of
I think
that.
his question is more geared to council.
Yeah, why don't we
Yeah,
just table
so-
that?
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I think we'll have a full developed conversation on that. Duly noted.
I just arguing with myself that if somebody's renting out a home, the property is taxed non-homesteaded and
I think part of
whatever.
it,
Just asking.
yeah, part of it
We
is,
don't need to spend a lot of time.
yeah, part of it is getting control of it and trying to alleviate some of the increases in home values and having having large companies buying homes for the sake of renting only. And we're trying to cap that a little bit because it pushes the value of the houses artificially up. So, but that's kind of the gist of it, but.
Nope, that's all right. I needed to hear it again. Thank you.
Okay.
And we just put something in there to just to think about as we're.
It's a guess.
We wanted to put in something, but it's not.
Yeah, you didn't want to go too large.
We didn't want
because
to
you
do
could put it
too
down.
large, but we did want to at least acknowledge if that's something that we have as a priority, it probably should be budgeted.
Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. So moving forward, we had a line item in the previous draft for around 370,000 for staff / retention plan. We allocated it in this budget to the correct department. And that was a decrease as well of 136,800. So you wouldn't see that on this particular line item in this new draft because we allocated the remainder of that to each of the department that each staff is affected.
So that relates to the overall market adjustment that is being proposed with the labor agreement. And so that is just allocating that, we've directly allocated it, and we did have some additional funds in the original draft as we hadn't had any final conversations with the labor union, so we had additional funds set aside in there, so we were able to reduce that.
By 137 approximately. And then we did keep 20,000 in that same line item for further discussion with department heads.
Based on the overall discussion of retention that has been, the surveys and things that we've been discussing about retention.
Is that common for class 4 cities to have their full staff salaries tied to the labor union of one union?
So it's generally tied to pay equity. It's a pay equity piece. So it's not necessarily about tying it to one union group. If we move a portion of our people outside of the pay scale, that's when we have we get challenged from a pay equity standpoint. So it's generally everyone's on the pay scale or everyone's on the
But
pay
I
scale.
mean, is that common for cities, for class 4 cities to do stuff like that, or larger cities? Because one could argue that public safety is in a different realm of its own because these people are out actually putting their lives on the line every day versus somebody that's, cutting the grass.
So from a scoring perspective, what we're required to do for pay equity is score positions based on the actual job. So that includes being out along the roadside, or out in the public as a public safety officer. So they're all scored on the level of education, their requirements related to hazards. All of that is scored into the system, and we're required by pay equity to score.
Dang, bro, this
all of the
sucks.
positions with the same kind of standard. So if we were to move out a group, again, it just allows for some challenge from a pay equity standpoint.
Jess and I asked that exact question to two different people. One, the people who, to George Gamak, who works on our scale and our equity and stuff, that very same question. And I think his answer would have been, that's calculated into the scoring and figured in with the value in the point scoring. We also went externally to another city and said, how does this work in pay equity? And it was a mutual college professor that we had that's a city manager in a larger city, and said, what are other cities doing? Are there other ways that this happens? And he also basically said the same thing as it relates to wage equity, that especially when you run into more issues the smaller the city is, because there's less data points. The larger the city, the more points on that scale and the more freedom you can have so that the tail doesn't.
Dang, bro, this
necessarily.
kind of sucks.
And so that was kind of, we had the
asked
same
that
question and we
question,
reached
and I
out
had
to 2 or
to-
3 different people to find.
Who's in charge of determining that pay equity is absolutely the gold, the standard in, like, who says we have to abide by
State law.
state law? Says,
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, is there different classifications within the state law that can define what pay equity is, you know? If you take non-emergency out of, and separate that from emergency workers, can you have pay equity within emergency workers and pay equity within non-emergency?
Not that I'm aware of, but I certainly can look into that as we finalize the draft. My understanding is everyone, whether or not they're, whether or not you categorize them as a different type of worker, it still, there's not a way to do that in pay equity, but it's certainly something that we could.
wait, are we doing closed captioning? Oh,
As far as I know, it's only been examined from the lens of an organization. I haven't seen it broken out from, because that's who you're being compared against, is other people in the organization, to show that you're not out of line in equity.
Yeah, and we don't have to solve that question with regards to the budget here, because we can always, we're gonna vote the paid piece later on down the road. You know, if the budget is set at what it is now based on the current equity situation, that's fine.
we could hire more, female police officers, will help the equation also. Right?
It avoids different problems elsewhere in equity.
Yeah.
It helps the equity calculation, for sure.
Yes, there are.
I think you could do it without, even if you had no female officers, if you have a base representation, you know. I mean, if there's 60 class 4 cities out there, I'd be curious to know what the bulk of them do.
And I guess just a point of emphasis too, a lot of the role that some of the public works employees play is defined in many instances as emergency response.
Oh, big time.
They're out there
Yeah.
plowing the roads to get the police
Yeah.
and fire. So it gets really complicated and just.
Yeah, I didn't mean to pick out somebody mowing the lawn, I was just.
No, I just wanted to remind,
Yeah.
for people that out there in the public that may have perceptions like that, we are kind of the silent arm of emergency response, and so I do want, it just gets complicated, and those are built into the job descriptions, right? X amount of the job is for these tasks, and that's how it's kind of wrapped up or rolled up, because it is a complicated kind of
Yeah.
conversation, for sure.
Sorry to sidetrack you.
No, those are great questions.
They really get into the minutia of
Yeah.
George's formula, which is a lot of it's proprietary, but where he'll say, an office person that might have the same grade score as a police officer has less risk there, but is greater exposure for liability to the city, so there's greater risk in that aspect of it, and that's how and his formula, I guess, has been tried and tested in court, which is what we're relying on his data in that grading, so.
And,
Okay. Well, and then to get back on track with the budget, some of the other big changes, we removed the IT manager that was budgeted for 2023. We reduced hours for some of the budgeted part-time staff, and then we pushed start dates of some of the full-time staff, such as one of the police officers. Actual fire service quotes, I didn't put it in memo, but that came in, and I discussed this at the last work session, that came in 40% higher than what we had originally budget. So that was an increase in this draft budget of $121,000. Assessing fees, we also got the 2022 actual assessing invoice, and that came in at $118,000. So we budgeted, we increased the 2023 budget from $105,000 to $120,000. So that was an increase of $15,000 on this draft of the 2023 budget.
How is that fee structure structured, and is it based on, is it a flat fee plus?
you guys.
Shut the hell up.
Someone is
For what?
really
'Cause I said so.
At least you
smell like tobacco chewing up. I know that.
Hell yeah, your daddy loves it.
Nah, you don't, bro.
Yeah, he does. He loves it.
Nah, you so fat, bro.
No, your daddy loves my
Yo,
fat
Slam,
homie.
Kate.
Can I talk to you?
Yeah, ass seven, bro. Go.
Sorry about that.
You got it?
Could you repeat that, Alan?
Yeah, Andrew Tate's gonna whoop your ass.
Beat your eye up.
Yeah, ass seven.
The assessing fee.
Oh, yeah,
Structure.
because it was like it was a couple year deal, right, that we signed with.
I believe
Oh,
so.
National.
Oh!
Too much.
Oh yeah, swing first.
Come to charge us that. Maybe Visey would.
The assessing contract, that's a great question. The assessing contract is a little bit based on,
Number of units.
number of units. They have a calculation.
Don't worry about it, that's
And,
enough for me.
yeah, it was in our contract, so it's a bit about valuation and a bit
Okay.
about, number of units. I think it was a combination of both, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
You guys need some time to straighten that out?
You can adjourn to go to the bathroom.
We can call a break.
No, it has, if you're okay with that, we could, that would be
Yeah.
great.
I'm gonna adjourn.